So here we are in the season of Lent. And Lent always, or at least often, begins with the story of Jesus in the wilderness. This year, the lectionary pairs that story with the ancient Judeo-Christian story of the rainbow covenant which God made with the whole earth after the great flood and Noah's Ark. This will be the story that the children hear today, and my sermon will explore this connection. Mark's Gospel says that Jesus was driven, that's the word that is used in the NRSV, into the wilderness immediately following his public baptism in the Jordan River, which signified a public act of commitment to the way of God that John the Baptist had been preparing for him. With baptism, Jesus signals the end of his former life. He dies not only to sin, but to all of the assumptions, worldviews, entanglements, and obligations of his former life as a citizen of Galilee. In this public act, he declares that he is no longer subordinate to the temple and the Jerusalem authorities, or to King Herod, or to Caesar and the Roman occupiers. His baptism, you see, is not only a religious act, but a political and an economic one. He is now free to pursue God's call and empowered to do all the things that will define his ministry. But knowing this, he must prepare to face everything good and bad that may come his way. So in order to prepare, Jesus is compelled by the Spirit to escape alone into the wilderness. With daily practice, he must strengthen the part of himself that is centered in God, the creator of everything, including the wild places where the Spirit flows freely without human constraint. There is, you see, a wild place within every human being with which most of us have lost touch, a wild place that is known only to ourselves and God, a wild, natural place deep within that connects us to our original God-given belovedness and our original God-given purpose. Jesus needed to become firmly grounded in this wild, beloved place within himself in order to meet and face the distortions of the so-called civilized world, which included the religious world. The story is that Jesus was in the wilderness for 40 days, which is a Hebrew way of saying a very, very long time. A very special long time, within which significant transformations take place. So during the time of Noah, it rained on the earth for a long time, 40 days and 40 nights. During their escape from Egypt, the Israelites were in the wilderness for a long, long time, 40 years. But during the very early days of Christianity, Jesus made appearances within the Christian community for 40 days before his ascension. The idiom of 40 days has become literal for us during this season of Lent. We walk with Jesus as he continues to proclaim the dangerous good news of God's love. Dangerous, we might ask? Why would good news about God's unfailing love be dangerous? Well, Jesus was very aware that his message would be threatening to both religious authorities and political tyrants because it empowered ordinary people. Jesus knew that in proclaiming this message, he would be risking his life. Much of his time in the wilderness most probably had to do with accepting that the cost of proclaiming God's reign of loving empowerment and peace and justice for all what we now call human rights, would likely cost him his life. The message of God's kingdom, or Malkuta in Aramaic, still cost the lives of many. Jesus was realistically preparing himself for the worst, while becoming empowered by a very real hope that the unjust world as he knew it could be and would be turned upside down. He hoped and believed that the kingdom of God could become and would become a reality. But as Mark's gospel makes very clear, not too far into his story, Jesus soon began to realize that the worst was going to happen. This journey would take him to the cross. In the wilderness, Jesus clearly struggled with what this would mean. Mark's gospel tells us that for survival and encouragement, he had only the wild beasts and the angels for comfort and companionship. They helped him root himself in the ground of a different kind of power, power with others and not over others. I like to think it was in the wilderness that Jesus began to pray the prayer that we now call the Lord's Prayer. I imagine that every morning and night he proclaimed God's Malkuta, which is the Aramaic word which God used to speak of God's reign. I imagine Jesus experiencing a deep, embodied sense of being loved with the love that is the birthright of every creature. I imagine Jesus standing under the starlit sky with his arms stretched out, taking in the fullness of the love that was living through him and everything around him, embracing a connection with the gift of his wildly wonderful and amazing capacity for God, wrestling with and overcoming the temptation to use that capacity for evil and selfish purposes. Then Jesus began his ministry by calling others to join him in a ministry of reconciliation and healing and wholeness. A wilderness-driven vision for the whole creation that was first expressed by the God of the Bible through the rainbow covenant with Noah. A vision that has yet to come into fullness. Brothers and sisters, as we join Jesus in his pilgrimage toward Jerusalem during this most unusual Lenten season, because it feels like we've been in Lent for a long time, may this rainbow vision become the ground out of which all our actions grow. And may we join with Jesus to bring forth the companionship of empowerment that will become God's reign of love in our world, a realm in which the dominion which God gives to human beings is along with the whole creation, a way of partnership that includes all. This is what Martin Luther King Jr. called the beloved community. This is what Jesus called the kingdom of God. Tete Malkuta. May it come fully, soon.